Good morning once again. Thank you so much for taking time for joining for our webinar today. I'm Anita, part of the product team and your host for today's webinar. A few housekeeping rules before we begin. Today's webinar is being recorded and a copy of the recording and slides will be shared with all the registrants. We will be allocating 15 minutes for Q&A towards the end, and please submit your questions in the Q&A pane. In today's constantly evolving IT landscape, every company faces the struggle with a multitude of external forces which have a dramatic impact on business. With the dramatic explosion of data, applications, IT modernization projects, and ever-growing employee base, most organizations today need a modern, scalable, and data-driven approach to manage information and enterprise architecture. Today, we have a very interesting topic where we will be diving deep to understand why enterprises needn't be stuck in managing complex and time-consuming integration architecture projects, how they can leverage LeanIX's virtual workspaces to streamline collaboration in the entire organization. Without further ado, I will hand it over to our incredibly eclectic, dynamic, and talented product manager, Felix Hoffman. The stage is all yours.
Thank you, Anita. That's an amazing introduction. Welcome everyone in either the US or in Europe. Good morning to the West Coast and of course to the East Coast as well. Good afternoon to everyone in Europe. Let's start by getting into the part about me. So I'm a product manager at LeanIX. I wasn't always that. I started out as a mathematician and did a lot of data science. So if you ever want to get in touch with me, talk about those topics, I'm all for that. But at LeanIX, I'm responsible for all the core systems. So everything that is about our inventory, how do you get data into our tool and out of the tool, and how our APIs work. I'll give a short introduction to LeanIX because I know there are some people on the line that have not yet that much connection to the tool and to our company. And I'll keep that short and brief, and then I go into virtual workspaces. So LeanIX is a company that started out in 2012 with 2 and 3 people. And we now have grown to a much bigger company. Still, we're in the startup and scale-up phase, and we're at around 150 employees now. This is like our Bonn-based team you can see at this year's summer party, and we're still growing a lot. So if you look at the total numbers, we're now at close to 160 people. We're still pretty young. We share a lot of different nations in our teams, and we're based in Bonn and Boston. And this is one common goal we share in one team. If you look at who is employing our product, we are very proud to have a lot of the huge names on our list of people that use us. And it's not only those well-established companies that have to leverage all of their technology and actually get a grasp on the many technologies they're using and the different systems they have, the vast amount of applications they have. But it's also about all those tech-savvy companies, some of them we shared on the bottom left here, that actually have a very have a need at least for being on a good level on managing their application portfolio and their risks cleverly. So they are looking for automation for highly automated processes and integrations with LeanIX. We actually proud ourselves to be thought leaders in modern IT architecture. So we actually do the same things ourselves that we tell our customers. Our main things to get around with is we are very fast in how we visualize. You get always the data ad hoc in our tool. We bring out of the box reports. Our data model is fully flexible. You can configure it in any way you want. And of course, we set on the latest technologies on our API and how you can integrate with LeanIX. And the ecosystem that we live in is, I think, state of the art. So you can integrate your, for instance, a business process portfolio management with Signavio or your CMDB with ServiceNow, and it gives a seamless integration into our system. So you can get a much more strategic overview about those things in LeanIX. of course, we ourselves use state-of-the-art technologies to deploy the software. So we are setting heavily on microservices, and everything in our environment is Dockerized. And well, if you give us some more months in the future, then everything will actually be pods on Kubernetes. But we are still looking to be here up to date and state of the art. What is actually interesting to me as a product manager is that we have a lot of different industries that actually bought our product and that actually invest into us. And that is actually something that makes me very proud. I get to see a lot of different companies, and all of them have a common need for doing not only enterprise architecture management, but use us for as a tool for digital transformation. And that is actually the challenge that I think most of our customers are facing, and that Anita in the introduction hinted at. Okay, so what is this about? When I look at the workspaces of our customers, and I'm just looking at some of the biggest ones, then you can see that the workspaces that we have, they increase a lot. So like the biggest customer that we have then has more than 70,000 fact sheets in our workspace. And of course, those fact sheets have links to them. That's actually what makes LeanIX so strong. And you can see it's a huge amount, and no one can grasp them just on their own. So you have a lot of data, yet you still want to get a strategic overview over this amount. And this makes it very hard to do because you easily get overwhelmed by the sheer amount of fact sheets you have. No one can keep track with 2,000 or 3,000 applications or even more. So in order to deal with this two things that go in different directions, we thought of virtual workspaces. So meaning a means to segregate the workspace by, for instance, your legal entities. And if you do that, then it should feel like there's nothing else in the world. So if you log into our workspace with an account that's in one of your legal entities, it shouldn't look like there's like open ends to a lot of other things that you just can't see or that you're not allowed to write on. It should look and feel like this is my workspace, and everything in here belongs to me, and there's nothing else in the world. That was actually one of the statements that one of the companies we worked this solution out with gave, and it was the phrase that we stuck to. In order to tell you how we implemented it and how does it work with us, I want to get some definitions straight. So the first thing is a virtual workspace. What does that actually mean? It's actually just a placeholder for saying, okay, that's the name of that part of your workspace. It's usually defined by an access control entity, an ACE. And in the future, every fact sheet will have an access control list, which is just a list of those access control entities. And I will show them later in the product directly, so you can see examples of that, but it's really just like that. You give an ID, and that ID is put on a fact sheet. And if you have that fact sheet ID on your user token as well, then you get access to the fact sheet. If not, you're not getting the access. Also, LeanIX has always supported, now for more than 2 years, the role-based access controls based on our authorization model. I'll quickly make a detour to tell you what we can do there, because I want to get straight what we can do in our role-based access control and what we can do with virtual workspaces. So for instance, if you create a new workspace in LeanIX, you have out of the box 3 roles in LeanIX, admin, member, and viewer. And it's pretty much what they can do. So an admin can read and write every part of the product, so the administration and all the segments of a fact sheet. A member can, of course, still edit everything in a fact sheet, but maybe not in the administration. And the viewer can, of course, only read stuff. It was already possible to adjust that. So for instance, you could introduce a new role, maybe a data privacy officer, someone who can just edit the GDPR thing and everyone else can only read it. So you can have an easy approval process on your fact sheets. And of course, there's a lot of other combinations possible, and our customers are already doing a lot of those. So if you want to get more about that and maybe introduce new roles into your workspace, get in touch with your customer success manager. Or if you're not yet a customer, get in touch with your sales rep. Okay. On contrast to that, virtual workspaces is a little bit of a different concept. We always thought of virtual workspaces in two ways. So the first one was you have one workspace and everything of your company is in that workspace. Means everyone can read, everyone can write everyone else's data. And as I already said earlier, this becomes a problem when you have a lot of information in your workspace because it can easily overwhelm, especially infrequent or new users. The other option was, and that's option C on this slide, to have multiple workspaces. So your first brand, your first legal entity gets one workspace and the second gets another and so on. But then you still have the problem that you don't have a common overview, that actually what you want with LeanIX, a strategic overview over your whole company, your whole group. And you lack the common view. So you had always to, most of the time out of date or cumbersome, get data into another workspace where you just aggregate all of that. A way around of that should be what we now branded as virtual workspaces. So an option to actually have those different physical workspaces within a single workspace, so you can still have the common overview, yet still have the logical separation and even enforced access rights to the individual fact sheets of that brand. And as a little kicker as well, you get the option to have some fact sheet types shared among all of those. For instance, you might decide you have this one common business capability model that you share among all of your legal entities, and you just split out the user groups and the applications. And then you again decide to have the IT components of your workspace together because you probably use the same technologies anyway. I will show you in a more detailed example later in a live demo. So just as a rule of thumb, if you're thinking about virtual workspaces, it's most of the time, if you think about permissions on a single fact sheet, and if you think about the role-based permission model, it's always about permissions on all fact sheets of a single type. For instance, if you want to hide a field or this GDPR section earlier, for everyone, but the persons of a single role. This is more on the role-based permission model. If you want to hide individual fact sheets from some other users or just show it to users of a specific legal entity, then you probably want to work with virtual workspaces. By the way, if you combine the two features, it gets really powerful. So what are the use cases? I have probably hinted already at some of those, but you can imagine you have different brands in your company and you want to still have the overview over your whole company. So you would probably define those 1, 2, 3 or even more virtual workspaces called ACEs here. And you would still have the group view. And then you would tag your fact sheets with those brands and the group view, and you could have everyone only see the part that they actually is relevant to them. You could also go by doing that based on the data that you actually have there. So maybe your EA practice needs to own some of the fact sheets and only have access to those, where your IT department probably needs some very specific other information, or your operation even a very different set of fact sheets. Another thing could be to go for the sensitivity of your data or the actual information access that you want. So there might be, imagine you're in a merger or acquisition scenario. You want to maybe put all the fact sheets that are for applications which from one side of the merger scenario coming on one of those virtual workspaces and the others on the other workspace. And at some point when you merge all of those applications, you remove the tags or even give it a new one, so you can see what will be in the resulting company of the merger. Or you do something like here, where you actually make it more sensitive, like a global, what everyone can see, what the teams can see, what your management board can see, or even your board of advisors or whatever. So you can make it by the sensitivity of the data. Or yet another thing, you could just go by the regions that your company is operating on, if you're on a global company. And there's even more use cases to that. So it's always a way on how do you separate your data, and how do you want to make only the relevant data for an individual person, really strip it down to the relevant minimum. Of course, I tried this out, and I will give you some examples on how this works. This is actually the one that I'm going to show you later, I think. So you could imagine like this a geographical distribution. You have this Americas, and then you maybe have the US and Brazil as your user groups below that. And then you have a very different view on what applications do you use. Instead of, if you're in the EMEA branch of your company, you might still see yet another company. So this is actually live screenshots from our tool, where I just explored from this user group, starting which applications are actually used by those user groups. A similar scenario is then like what I showed you earlier. So on the sensitive information, so I have someone who has this sensitive flag on his user account, a document like a fact sheet has that, and then only that person can see it. And all the things that have not the sensitive tag could be used by only that person. So you could have even several separate levels here, several levels here. There's a lot of possibilities in that. And even another combination could be to distribute your company by the business capabilities that you have. So actually, this is two scenarios here. On the left-hand side, we have like Christina, she's part of marketing, and she can only see her business capabilities and the applications that support those business capabilities and the IT components that are used in order to bring those applications to life, and what providers they have. And the very same view for Benjamin, who's in some other department, I think this is finance and accounting. He's seeing a lot of different applications, and if he explores this, he will see a lot of different vendors, just the information that is relevant to him. Also, I was always talking here about the relevant information. When we put in virtual workspaces, we have this in two configuration options. The one is just read access. The other one is read and write access. So you can also modify who can actually update information in a fact sheet. This can make a lot of sense. Imagine you're in a company that has a lot of development teams that actually provide applications to your company or even to your customers. And you want to ensure that the information is only maintained by those teams. You could tag your applications with exactly those access control entities in order to make sure only those teams can update. And actually, this is what a lot of the more tech-driven companies are looking for. They want to ensure that only those people can update the information that they have, that they're actually putting into the product. So how does it work? Imagine you're having a user account, maybe in Active Directory, and then via ADFS and our single sign-on integration, this becomes a part of the user's permission to the workspace. And so an access control entity may be based on a user's group membership is populated as an access control entity, and that access control entity is put on the user's token. On the LeanIX side, you put on a fact sheet a list of those ACEs. And then if a user tries to access a fact sheet, we will actually check what is in the user's token, what is in the list on the fact sheet. And if they have something in common, then the user actually gets access to that fact sheet. And as you know, there's a lot of parts of our product where fact sheets can be accessed. It's not just our inventory and the fact sheet details page, it's also all of our reports, the searches, the exports, and so on. And we made a lot of effort to actually put this in place on all of those. So if someone searches for a fact sheet that he or she doesn't have access to, it will just not pop up. If you think about this approach, how does this work? So you probably have a lot of fact sheets that are global access, so everyone can read and write. Then there's probably some where you can only read, and there's probably only very little where you can then read and write. I put this in another manner here, so you probably can see if the read access and the write access on a fact sheet is empty, that means everyone can read and write it. If the read access is still empty, it means everyone can read, but only the persons that are in the write access can actually access the fact sheet. So if someone has the tech marketing, that's just an example here, then only that department could write. And you can even go further and say, okay, only marketing can read and write. And you can, of course, have multiples in here. So you could have multiple people have read access and only few have write access. Okay. Let's go into a live demo. So I will, in a minute, switch over to a live workspace. Just as an idea, I will have segregated the workspace by business capabilities. There's 3 members, probably we'll just dive into 2 of them. and we will have a look at the workspace admin, who can still have the common overview over all of them. So let me get there. This is still our Zoom session. So this is now our admin, Peter. He has, you can already guess, access to most of the fact sheets in this workspace. So if I'm going on the inventory, you can see pretty much overview here. He has also access to who has read access to what. So he can easily check for what fact sheets have the finance and accounting tag or something like that. And he can, of course, search for fact sheets. And if he's searching for SAP, he's finding this easily. How did he configure that? He actually went to administration. He can go to access control, and there he can define access control entities. Let's have a look at one, say the finance part. It's comprised of an ID, a display name that you can change. So the ID is fixed. You cannot change it after you've defined it. And you can give it a description. I went through the effort and actually made one. Of course, you can delete them again, but then that means also it will be removed from every fact sheet. And you can manage them, and you can, of course, not only have the use case about the business capabilities in here, but also you could have at the same instance the distribution via user groups. Then I also did say something about that you can define this per type. So for instance, in this workspace, I configured the applications and processes, user groups, projects, and interfaces as read and write restricted. So if a user creates a new fact sheet of that type, that user will automatically assign his or her ACEs on that fact sheet, meaning it will stay in that virtual workspace. And all the other things are shared in this workspace, but you can have any other configuration that might be necessary for your scenario. So this is the overview. You can still go, say, in reporting, and now you can see that Peter Schmidt, that's our admin here, has access over the whole thing. He can see everything, and if he goes in our interface circle map, and what did I choose? I guess I went for SAP, right? He can still open that, yep, and explore that in our visualizer easily and can see everything that belongs here. Okay, let's have a look at someone else. Sorry, I have to make another browser session for this, or else the LeanIX system will log me in again as Peter. This is Nicola. She's part of human resources. So you can already see she has a lot less fact sheets that she can see. If I'm going into inventory, you might still see a lot less numbers here, especially applications is much less. I'm just trying to put this side by side so you can actually see it, what this actually means. So she has a lot less applications that she actually can access. And this is actually about, she only sees the applications that are really relevant to her. If she's looking for SAP, she's maybe seeing the interface because she has an interface to that fact sheet, but she's not actually seeing the SAP FI because she's not allowed to. And if you go to reporting, her application landscape is really just HR. That's what she needs. And if we go to the interface circle map, it looks a lot less exhaustive than the thing that our admin had. So if she goes to that and looks at her interface circle map, you will see there's no way she can go to anything else than the fact sheets that she can actually see. Let's log out and let's log in with someone else. So let's talk, I think I called him Benjamin. So Benjamin is one of those guys from finance and accounting, and he actually can see also much less fact sheet, but he's actually one, of course, as he's in finance and accounting, he can see that SAP FI thing, and his application landscape is all about finance, accounting, and billing. And if he goes to his interface circle map, it's still a lot less, only the ones that he actually needs. And now this one is here, and he can actually easily see that and access the our visualizer and extrapolate the data. And if you remember the things that were on Peter Schmidt's SAP environment, there was a lot more than now Benjamin has in this workspace. because it's just the relevant information that he needs. Of course, this goes through all of our reports, through all of our searches. The whole inventory is filtered for that. There's nothing he can do in order to get access to the other virtual workspaces. So I think I'm through with the demo part. So there's not much left to say before we get into the Q&A thing. Maybe one more things on the things to note. So who can use virtual workspaces? It's all of our professional and ultimate editions. It's a paid feature. So if you need a quote, get in touch with your sales rep or your CSM. And available now. It was already some part available in May, but we still needed to deliver the right part, which is now in place as well. And yeah, we're looking forward to bring a lot of value to a lot of our customers. And before we get into the Q&A, I just want to get your attention also on the probably biggest event for EAs in Europe in this November, where we get a lot of people together in Bonn. I know we have a lot of US audience in the call, so probably a lot to do to jump to Europe for that. So we will also have a similar event in the US, I think in May next year, but it's not yet settled, I think. So let's look at the Q&A.
Well, thank you so much, Felix, for the fantastic overview. With that, we would jump into the Q&A. The first question that we have is, can you highlight some of the best practices to keep in mind while designing virtual workspaces?
Okay, that's a tough question. So probably it needs to be based on your company's layout. So if you have a strong separation in your company based on the legal entities or your brands, then it probably makes also sense to do just a segregation on your workspace by that. If your scenario is actually you're just in this merger scenario and you want to just get a grasp on which application comes from which part of your company, then you probably want to do this based on the companies that are merging here. If your problem is more on the information security part, you probably just want to tag the fact sheets that you think are very sensitive and leave the rest just open. Maybe as a guideline here, I know this is a cool feature and I really want to give a lot of people value here, but we at LeanIX believe in collaboration and to have the most information available for everyone. Yet we still see the need that we need to reduce the amount of data that each individual person sees, because it's just overwhelming. If you see like 40,000 fact sheets of your workspace, no one can handle that.
Okay, cool. Thank you. The next question is, how many levels of write capabilities can be segmented, and how does it impact my view and modeling capabilities?
How many levels? So, I mean, the amount of ACEs that you can have is not limited. But there's no hierarchy to them, at least not right away. Yeah, that's not something that we foresee to actually have that in a hierarchical manner. Of course, you can give them names like that and ensure that you can assign only the ones in some tree. But yeah, I wouldn't go into that. It's probably too sophisticated for that.
Okay, cool. The last question what we have is, can you detail out what levels of customization are possible across multiple brands in an organization?
So those brands, they will still share the same workspace. So it means they will see the same fact sheet types, and the fact sheets themselves will have the same fields. The virtual workspaces can't do anything about that. But what you can do is you can use it together with the role-based access controls that I mentioned earlier. And then you can, of course, like hide or make visible some of the fields of a fact sheet for several people. So you would actually not only transport the access control entities with the user, but you would also transport a custom role of that user. And then you can actually make the fact sheet look very different for users from your one legal entity than to the users of a very different legal entity. It's a sophisticated scenario. you should get in touch with our customer success team and our professional services for that.
Well, sounds good. Well, with that, it's a wrap. Thank you so much, Felix, for the fantastic overview. We hope that the webinar was informative and engaging. We appreciate your participation in today's webinar and stay tuned for our next webinar invite. Thank you so much.